All right. Hey, Bruce, thanks for joining us here. I wanted to introduce you and actually kind of let you go and fire off what you do. I've been working with you for a few years and kind of tell us about yourself. Tell us about your company.
Okay, so my name is Bruce. I own a company called Rarefied Air Environmental. Owned it for about a decade. Really enjoy it. We test for many things: asbestos, lead, bacteria, mold, illicit drugs. So you better watch out.
Yeah.
Uh, I test for lead and water, fires, soot, char, ash, dioxins, VOCs, particulates, and on and on and on. So that's kind of our gig now. That's what we do. We're lucky enough to this last year open up our own laboratory. So now we have a laboratory at our disposal. My daughter graduated UCSD and is in physics and biology and chemistry. So we tasked her on getting her self together and helping us open up our own lab. So now she owns the lab, and I kind of got a connection there.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. So you guys do testing the restoration and construction industry.
Yeah, mostly. Actually do testing. That's only a small part of our testing, but it
Okay.
is part of our testing. A lot of our testing is is for commercial. So
Okay.
we'll test a lot for, let's say, school districts,
Mm-hmm.
colleges, universities, things like that. On different types of testing you'd never even think existed. But usually for restoration and construction, we're looking at lead, asbestos, bacteria, mold, soot, char, ash. Those are the things that we're really testing for when it comes to restoration and construction.
Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about the basic samples:
Okay.
lead, asbestos, mold. If we were just talking about lead, asbestos, maybe bacteria in general.
Okay.
How do you guys test? How do those actual tests get performed?
So what happens is we have field techs in the field, and once we get the okay from the customer, we go out and we actually send a field tech out there, and they're certified. They're either a CSST, a certified surveillance technician, or a CAC, and that's the highest in the land. That's as a CAC is a certified asbestos consultant. So we have about five of those, and we have five CSSTs, around 10 in the field at any one time. And those are the people that go out and they actually physically, Dave, they take the samples.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're out there taking the samples, they go out there, they're looking behind, let's say, electrical outlets and light switch covers, and that's where they're taking the asbestos samples from.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you know, the asbestos isn't really in the drywall, it's in the mud, and it's also in the texture coating.
The texture coating.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then you find it sometimes in the plumbing areas of, let's say, the lines that, the flues that come out of the exhaust of your water heater. A lot of times that's transite pipe. It's 100% pure asbestos. Sometimes it's in a flooring tile, 9x9, Armstrong flooring tile. And we find it in other areas too. So we actually physically go out and take the samples, bring them to our lab, and then we analyze them. And that's how we do asbestos.
So for asbestos, what you said that some of the transite pipes in plumbing instances or is 100% asbestos.
Sure.
So just kind of high level, if someone is doing construction, let's say remodeling a fairly large bathroom, bedroom, or whatever it is, what's the percentage of asbestos that from a health perspective or even from a legal perspective that we should be concerned about?
And that's a great question. So in the state of California, the law is any amount of asbestos.
So any amount of
Any
asbestos.
amount. So
yeah.
let's say we find something it's less than 1%, which we often do.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to do abatement on less than 1%.
So you're telling me that less than 1% of asbestos, so if you take 100 square feet of drywall, less than 1% of that is asbestos, there's still a special and specific protocols for the remediation or removal of it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the state of California, any asbestos at all in the samples, you have to abate.
You have to abate.
Mhm.
Is that the same for lead?
So lead is a little different. Lead used to be, and I'm not really caught up on that, used to be 5,000 parts per million or greater would be lead-based paint. That means you would have to have it abated.
Mm-hmm.
The city has changed those, gotten a little stricter. I don't know the exact laws on that. because I'm not a licensed lead
Lead
assessor processor, but all my techs are,
Yeah.
thank God. But anything less than that would be lead containing paint or lead containing products. And when they're lead containing products, as long as you have your RRP, you can do it yourself if you're a restoration company or a construction company. If you haven't had that class, at least one person in the company, then you would need to call an abatement company.
Okay.
But the only time you call an abatement company is when it's lead based paint or lead based paint products. Could be in tile, could be in paint, around encasements, doors, and windows.
Seem to be countertops.
Countertops for sure. Also, it could be in bathtubs from the 50s and 60s. You remember those cast iron bathtubs?
Yeah.
Problem is that they used a ton of lead on the when they painted them to make them shine on the actual last coat. When they actually, cooked it to make it look beautifully white or whatever porcelain they used, there's a ton of lead in those.
Yeah.
So if you have a little baby and you're taking the baby and you're washing the baby in those tubs, what happens is the baby ingests the water, gets high levels of lead, gets really sick, goes to the city, and then the city has to call us because they have a duty obviously at the hospital to call the city health department. Then the health department calls us when a baby gets poisoned, and then we go out there, and most of the time it's the bathtub. They're bathing the child in the bathtub. Yeah, it's really bad. So, the protocol is before 1978 in the state of California, except one city, and that's the city of San Diego. They're 1 year stricter. They're actually 1979.
Uh-huh.
So before 79 in the city of San Diego, before 78 in everywhere else in the state of California.
Was the removal of lead in most construction products to the best of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But, we go by date. Asbestos is a little different. You don't go by date, but with lead, you go by date.
You go by date.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of lead and asbestos. How about, like mold remediation, people find mold in bathrooms, bedrooms, wherever it is. What are the limitations when it comes to mold?
That's a great question. There's no PEL limits, personal exposure limits. In the state of California.
So PEL stands for personal exposure limits,
correct.
And that's sort of the guideline around.
That's the guideline. So that's what we have with lead and asbestos, right? But in the state of California, mold is unregulated. So it's the Wild West. So I always tell people, be careful. If a restoration company comes in or somebody comes in, let's say a fly-by-night testing company that, is charging $195, well, they're probably getting a kickback from the restoration company because they're saying, well, call this restoration company, come out and do the mold. Problem is, mold's unregulated. So I tell consumers, be very careful on who you use. Use a certified company that has its IICRC licenses, performing, mold remediation. Because otherwise, you could walk in, have a company that's unscrupulous and say, oh yeah, there's mold here, charge $10,000-$20,000 for your house, when there was really no mold there. So you got to be real careful. Use certified people, look, make sure, go on the internet, maybe Yelp, maybe Google, and see if they got great ratings, and you can physically get a hold of these people and ask how they did on the job. So you got to be careful.
How does mold testing and mold clearance go? So if someone were to find, see visible mold, that their closet's covered in mold and things like that, and they're to get it remediated, if there's no personal exposure limits, what does a clearance of mold look like?
So a clearance of mold looks like this. It's pretty simple. If we take an outside baseline sample, which we do on every mold job.
So that's just outside of the home or building.
Because mold is around us everywhere, right, guys? We have mold everywhere. So if we take an outside sample, and the inside sample is much less than the outside sample, then we know that the restoration company or the remediation company has done their job. If it's more than outside, then we know we still have a problem and they have to go back to the drawing board. Now, it has to be significantly less than outside, but we just have to make sure through a actual visual inspection also, not just an air quality, but a visual inspection. Before they button up the drywall, we want to see the studs. We want to see the walls, inside the walls. And we want to see visually. So what I tell people, a mold inspection is like 95% visual, 5% actual air sampling. We take 75 liters of air through a pump. We pull it across onto and shoot it onto a glass slide, and then we take it to our lab, and my daughter or one of the lab assistants will read that slide and physically count how many mold spores of each genre are in the air, and then we'll notate that and we'll compare it against the outside sample.
The outside sample. So mold clearance is traditionally so visual and then air sampling.
Of course, and if you don't do that, like a lot of people go, do I really need to pay for the clearance? Well, yeah, that's the most important part, because like we're the last person, we're a third-party testing company, so we represent the homeowner in the transaction. So we want to make sure the homeowner is taken care of, right? Just like you guys. I mean, we want to make sure that homeowner gets their money's worth and that there's no mold anymore in the location. And the only way that can do that is a visual and then an air sample. It's the only way we can tell.
And Bruce, mold exposure is pretty severe. We've spoken to many clients.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah,
really
yeah.
get-
Sometimes I'll walk, and this is the honest to God's truth. I'll walk into a job, and I'll think, yeah, right. I don't see any visual mold, and I can't breathe. My chest actually clams up, and I'm actually wheezing pretty quickly. So what I tell people is, people will call me and say, I don't see any visual mold, but Bruce, I feel like I've been sick, and the children have been sick for like 6 months or a year. Well, what do you mean? And then they'll tell me, well, they have a runny nose, postnasal drip. They feel really bad. When they're at home, they just feel really under the weather. I mean, they're not making it up. This is the real deal, guys. And I mean, it ruins their life. So, we have to take it seriously. And I tell property managers, which is a big part of what I do in my company, is commercial, multifamily, residential. I tell them, you guys got to be especially sensitive to mold, because there's people out there, they may not see it, but it could be growing in the walls, and they feel horrible. And they feel really bad. And I get people that call me anywhere from I can't breathe, I don't feel good, to almost debilitating. They're like, I can't even stay in my house anymore. I can't breathe. Sure enough, we'll go out there, take a sample, and instead of being in the teens, let's say the spore count, I mean, it's literally in the tens of thousands. And then I know why they're so sick. Either Aspergillus, Chaetomium, or Stachybotrys. I mean, it'll be off the charts. And then I know that's exactly what they're doing. So I always tell property managers, be very sensitive to the fact. And now there's a new law, SB 655. It states it's one of the things that you can't occupy your home or apartment or condo if those levels are so high and you see the mold. It's an actual law now in the state of California. So I tell the property managers, take it seriously, because that law has teeth. They will come by and inspect.
And any type of property, it doesn't matter the age.
Doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter. It's any type of property at all. It's commercial, residential, industrial. It has it all. And so you got to take it seriously. Years ago, nobody took it seriously. But then, there started to be lawsuits from Ed McMahon on The Tonight Show. His house had to be pretty much leveled in Hollywood. That's when mold actually came to the forefront, was because of Ed McMahon. And he complained, and his family and his wife, and it happened to be a big health problem. And then it became pretty famous in the 80s. And that's when mold started to catch on. Until then, didn't really hear much about it. Before the 1980s, didn't hear much about mold. But then by the end of the 80s into the 90s, started to hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
People started to get conscious of the fact, hey, this is really a health problem. And you got to take it serious. Mold is serious. A lot of people say, oh, it's no big deal. Yeah, it is a big deal. It can be a very big deal to people. And I've seen people going to the hospital for it. Honest to God. They're actually admitted into the hospital. I mean, it's so bad. So, it's something you got to watch. I'm not saying that's all the time, but I'm saying I have seen cases like that and been involved in cases, lawsuits. And actually, mold is the biggest thing people sue over. They hardly ever sue over asbestos and lead, which can kill you. But mold, they're suing all the time. And if you're selling a house and you've had water intrusion and you've had mold, you better put it on the deck page. Because if you don't put it on the deck page, you're in big trouble, because they're going to come after you. The buyer could say, hey, look, You know, I've just had a company come in here, a restoration company. They've looked into it. I can tell there's been water damage now. Where I look on the ceiling or something, I see the brown marks. I'm really looking closely. So there was a water leak upstairs or something, and then it turns into a whole lawsuit. And then that homeowner that's the seller, right? You have up to 2 years by law to go after the seller. So now all of a sudden, the seller's like, oh my God, I got a problem. So I always tell sellers, just be honest and transparent. Put it on the deck page. You've had 2 floods? Tell them you've had 2 floods.
Yeah.
Where was the flood? The kitchen and the master bathroom. Okay, tell them that. You know, save yourself. At least if you disclose it, it's buyer beware. If you don't disclose it, the buyer can come back up to 2 years and sue you for it. So mold is something to watch out for.
Do you have any other questions, ask them regarding mold? If not, I figured jump into soot and ash too.
Mold's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, mold's a big one. I mean, that's why I'm telling you guys, you know, people have to understand you got to take it seriously. Years ago, when I first started in the business, I started in the 70s. So that's how back I go, 79. And I was in the business I owned a chain of dry cleaners. And I got into this industry because people would have fires. And so I'd ozone the clothes, and then I would return them. And I would think, well, there they go. They smell good. They've been ozoned. I dry clean them and I laundered them. So I got in a lot of years ago, you know, and even back then they were complaining of mold and stuff, but nobody really did anything about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that leads us into the questions of the soot and ash
Right,
and
soot
smoke,
and ash.
smoke contamination.
Right.
So
And smoke contamination, because I thought, well, you know, how bad could it be? You know, you ozone it, you get rid of the smell, you dry clean it, and you launder it, and it's all good. But guess what? It's not always all good.
yeah.
Right?
So so when people have fires at their homes, is there a test that shows the amount of soot, char,
Sure.
or ash in the home?
Sure, it's an accepted test by not only the consumer portion, but also by adjusters, insurance adjusters from insurance companies. It's called soot, char, ash. And what soot, char, ash is, it's a test we go into. We take special wipes, special media. We wipe down different areas of the home, the HVAC system, areas like that. And then even furniture, if they've had their house, you know, there's furniture and it's not a total loss, they don't think it is. And we go do a wipe test. And what we do is we take that to a lab, and what we do is we analyze those wipes, and we look for the soot, char, ash in those wipes that come off on those wipes. And we use that as a baseline to find out whether it's really polluted with the smoke or not. What's important to understand is not only the amount of smoke on something, but what's in the smoke.
Mm-hmm.
What's in it, guys? Because, you know, how many years have we gotten lumber, and we don't want termites to eat the lumber, so we go to Home Depot and we buy the lumber that's impregnated, you know, and they call it by an easy name, you know, like it's
Treated
no
lumber.
big deal. This is pressure treated lumber.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they call it, right, guys? Go to any.
It's all the sill plates.
It's all
of
the
most
sill
homes.
plates.
Yeah.
So every home has sill plates that have pressure treated lumber. Well, look, what could be in it? I'll tell you what they impregnate in it: pure arsenic. And that's why they don't have any problem when it's sitting there as a sill plate and it's never really deteriorated much, unless there's a lot of water on it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
because termites don't eat it, because it's pure arsenic. So if you take a piece of pressure treated lumber and let's say it burns, right? I mean, just a fraction of it, you know, let's say a 4x8 piece, just a fraction would kill a person from that much arsenic that's in that pressure treated lumber. So if you take that and multiply it times tons of the pressure treated lumber that's sitting in your house, right? It could kill hundreds and hundreds of people just from being the chromiated arsenic that's inside of the sill plates, which is in the pressure treated lumber. And it's really interesting, guys, because they call it, oh, it's just pressure treated. So they make it like it's no big deal. That will kill you if it burns, because then what happens is that arsenic becomes into the air, right? It becomes into
Friable,
the air.
yeah.
And once it's friable, it gets all over the home, right? So now you're just saying, oh, soot, char, ash, is that big any big deal? Well, yeah, it'll kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to really watch it. Soot, char, ash doesn't just cause acid problems on metal and ruin everything and the whole house that's metal, but also could kill you, the exposure level to it. You know, most people don't, you know, what's pressure treated lumber? But I'm glad we got on that subject because that is a real subject. As you guys know, in the military, they used to just let people burn all the lumber and all the trash all the time around the world with our guys in the armed forces. And yeah, just throw it in a big 55-gallon metal container and let's just burn it. And then all these guys are coming home with cancer. And all these guys are coming home dying. And we're not supporting them. Nothing's happening. Well, what could happen when you burn all this trash? Well, if you take plastic and burn it, it becomes something called dioxins. Dioxins, you guys know well, because when you have a fire in your house, dioxins, all the plastics, right? All the plastics turn to dioxin. Dioxin was used, let's just put it in another term that people can understand. Dioxins was used in the Vietnam War. It was called Agent Orange. And Agent Orange, my next door neighbor he was in the Army and he actually got Agent Orange on him only one time. So the helicopter dropped it on him as a defoliage in the Vietnam War. And he has had 12 operations on his face because he lost his nose. So they had to take other flesh from his body, other areas, and reconstruct his nose over 12 operations. But it's only Agent Orange. But Agent Orange is pure dioxins. That's how they made it.
Let's back up real fast and kind of unravel that. So when you have a house fire, I hear often that people compare it and say, "Oh, well, you know, it's just like you were sitting outside of a bonfire. Why not just throw your clothes in the, you know, the laundry,
right, and launder them,
and launder them and clean them?" And I violently disagree with that because of exactly what you say. So what are the different areas? So if we have a house fire and it encompasses, let's just say, half of the home, so it encompasses most building materials.
Right.
We've got exposure to now dioxins from
the plastics.
We've got arsenic from the pressure-treated lumber. We've got, I know, mercury in light bulbs, all incandescent light bulbs.
Right. You got mercury all over there. Some of the light switches from the 40s and 50s actually have pure mercury inside of the light switches. You know that.
So we've got mercury, dioxins, and what am I blanking on the other one?
We have mercury, dioxins, and arsenic.
From that. Right? And so do you do tests that break that out? So if we have a homeowner...
We can. Yeah. But most of the time, we do soot char ash.
Okay.
So you got to say, okay, if there's above 10% soot char ash in the actual samples we take, that's alarming because that means there's a lot of soot char ash that has been deposited not only onto the building materials, but also onto their clothes, their furniture, and everything else they own, the books and all that. So all that has to be addressed. And insurance companies have to understand to make it right, we have to do it. Otherwise, these cancer-causing agents, they're living in a home that's unhealthy. You know, I hear this all the time. Oh, just use a chem sponge. What in the heck? A chem sponge? What does that have to do with anything?
So let's just say in your expertise, what is a chem sponge and can it serve as a remediation process?
As a remediation tool. How about that? A remediation tool. So a chem sponge, guys. So like, what is that going to do? So you take the outside of the drywall and you wave this magical chem sponge, it's going to get all the soot char ash. That's not the problem. The problem is the soot char ash is inside the walls. You got to take the drywall off. And then what do you have inside the drywall? You have something called insulation. Guys, insulation is just a big sponge. That's all it is. You think when you have a fire and all that soot, char, and ash from the fire goes into the insulation? Well, what are you going to do with the insulation? You're going to let it sit there for 30 years while you occupy the house because the insurance company doesn't let you tear down the drywall? So now you're just living in a cancer-causing agent. You're drowning in it. So you got to take off the drywall. You got to address and pull, do an insulation pull. And then every time, and you guys don't tell me you've never seen it, you pull away the insulation and what's there? All the smoke and soot is sitting behind all that insulation. So now you got to address that. How do you address that? You know, ice blasting. That's how you address it. There's nothing easy about this. And so a fire, you have to be real careful. You have to tear off the skin, all the drywall. You have to go treat not just the studs, but you have to treat what's behind the insulation. And almost every time you tear out the insulation, then you guys are probably calling, going, oh, we got a whole big problem here because now there's all kinds of smoke, and soot, char, and ash is really what you're seeing from the smoke. The remaining smoke is actually soot, char, ash, and that comes out 50, 60% when we take samples. So you've got to be really cognizant of the fact that if you have a house fire, the soot, char, and ash is very important, because that goes not only onto the building materials, but again onto all your own, the things you own. It gets onto the soft goods, your clothes, your shoes, your luggage. Maybe it gets onto your mattress and your bed cover. All that is now polluted. All that has to be addressed. But then with you guys, that's only a small portion. That's the contents of the house. Then you got to deal with the structure. And the structure goes on and on and on. Because what if it got into the attic, guys? Because most of the time it does. That means you got to pull all the insulation. You got to treat all the lumber. You got to HEPA-vac everything. You have to make it so that these cancer-causing agents, i.e. the soot, char, and ash, is totally removed. If you don't totally remove it, we're putting the whole family at risk. Look, it's bad enough, like I tell people with asbestos, the latency period's 20, 30 years. So for my age, I don't buy green bananas, so it's not going to affect me. Right? But at your guys' age, or younger people call me, I'm like, yeah, it really affects you. I mean, 27,000 people a year die. Mesothelioma is a real thing, guys. I mean, you see it endlessly, excuse me, on late night television. Goldwater, the Meso book, so it kills you. And same thing with soot, char, ash. You're being exposed to cancer-causing agents, and you're living at that home where somebody came in and just used a chem sponge. They never opened up the wall. So you're living there, breathing in that air 24/7. So of course, don't be surprised when it kills you and you get cancer.
And to your point, how big of a fire? With half the home, I think it's instinctual.
It doesn't need to be a big fire, because I don't care about the fire. I care about the travel of the smoke. So a lot of times people call me, and I know this is crazy, but half the fires I deal with are Teslas that burn up in garages. I get it all the time, but yet I never see it on the national news, on the local, I never see it. But yet half the fires we had a Tesla and it burned up in the garage. Well, guess what? You know what that tells me? There's a ton of lead in your home. There.
And then the lithium ion, the byproduct of that
and the
lithium
byproduct of
ion
lithium
is hydrogen
ion
fluoride.
Is hydrogen fluoride. So it's not hard to tell you, hey, I don't get it, guys, but if your garage burnt, that means it went into the house. As far as I'm concerned, the house is totaled. I'm sorry, but it's totaled. And it seems to always be a damn Tesla. I don't mean to knock Teslas. I mean, I don't care one way or another. But the lithium ion battery overheats, starts a fire, the Tesla melts down, and those are about half the big fires I get. Now, fortunately, it's just the garage. But unfortunately, the whole house is totaled now.
So in your opinion, do you see the benefit of doing soot, char, and ash analysis on any and all fires?
Any and all fires. I don't care whether any plastic burns or not. I don't care if any lead burns or not. It's just the byproducts of everything in that fire makes it cancer-causing, where you have to do a soot, char, ash test. If you're a homeowner, you don't do a soot, char, ash test, you're leaving everything on the table. A lot of times people will go, I don't know how I got stage 4 cancer. I don't know how I got this lung cancer. I never smoked. But how do all these police and firemen die of lung cancer and they never smoked? Well, their turnout coats and the clothes that they wear are exposing them to the soot, char, ash on every job. And they're going in there, and you hear all the time. And I'm not just talking about I'm not going to just lean on and say, Twin Towers. Let's forget about the Twin Towers for a second and everybody that died in that exposure to soot, char, ash. Let's just talk about the firemen that work day to day for us, local, state, federal. And they're killing themselves because their turnout coats, they're always wearing those turnout coats. And they're contaminated. We wash them. We use a special process. I'm sorry, guys, there's no special process. Those chemicals remain in the turnout coats. And this is why we see year after year these firemen dying at 32 years old, 35 years old. You only need to look as far as your local fire department to see young men dying and women all the time, because it's their exposure to the soot, char, ash. Can't stop it. It happens. They're putting their life on the line. Some people make it through, some don't. But years ago, fires weren't treated with any big deal. But now we have the technology to test for dioxins, for soot, char, ash, for particulates, for all these other things that are in the soot, char, ash, let's say, like the arsenic. Years ago, they couldn't do it, but now we have the technology to do it. And so now we know better. We should know better. I don't want any staff adjusters or adjusters from companies, let's say, from insurance companies or restoration companies. They need to wear full PPE. How many times do we see guys, they have a house fire, right? And then you see the husband and wife with no PPE. They're wearing like an N95 mask. Well, that's great for COVID, but that's not going to help you unless it's P100
I mean,
or
we
greater.
we see it regularly where everyone in our company will show up in a full PPE, full face respirator, gloves, everything, and then the staff adjusters from the insurance company and their restoration professionals that they bring out will show up in jeans and a t-shirt. Right. They'll maybe put on an N95 thinking that that's going to do good, and then they wonder why they come out and smell like smoke for the rest of the day too.
Yeah. Why do I smell like smoke? They go home and the first thing they say is, "Oh, I shower because I smell like smoke." Yeah. That is killing them. Okay, I don't want any staff adjuster or any adjuster for any insurance company or any restoration person that's walking a fire job to ever not walk the fire job without booties, without a full Tyvek suit, without gloves, and especially without a P100 or greater respirator. Yeah. And a NIOSH one that's approved that they can put new filters in every time they walk the job. I'm not saying put that mask in your truck, throw it in and use it on the next job, because unless you seal that mask off in a Ziploc bag, that mask is pulling in contaminants all the time. So every time you walk those jobs to protect yourself, your employees, the employees of insurance companies, the employees of restoration companies, I mean, it's really bad. You need to use a respirator with new inserts every single time, guys, because the soot, char, ash will kill you. It's killing right now, I don't know, probably across the United States, hundreds, if not thousands of firemen all the time. And so we got to take that as an example. It shouldn't be shocking to us in 2024 what's happening.
So when you do a soot, char, and ash analysis, at what percentage? So you said it's a wipe. So if we take a 1 square inch wipe, if you get 50% of that,
that's really bad. So if it's above 10%,
if it's above 10%, yeah, so 10% of the surface area that you wipe, if that's above, you assume that is heavily contaminated.
That's correct.
So in that case, would you, and I won't quote you on that, but would you assume that soft goods and plush materials are going to be considered deemed a total loss?
Correct.
Total. And then how about?
It's got to be below 5%.
Below 5% to be, call it repairable?
Yeah. Not even, you could repair it, iffy, but at least it's not a big issue below 5%. It passes a clearance. So if we go in there after the job and everything's all cleaned up and we can get below 5%, we'll clear it.
Okay.
It's negligible. It's trace. We'd call it trace. Trace would mean what's normally maybe in the atmosphere, obviously. Like, there's always exposure limits of mold and asbestos and lead that are in the background. We know that. They're in the den of everything. But above 10%, that's getting really polluted there. So we would, ask you to do certain things like remove the carpet, throw it in the trash, remove the carpet pad, throw it in the trash. A lot of things we'd tell you to address above 10%, including the HVAC system. Sometimes you can clean it out. Sometimes when it's 30, 40%, we'd say throw it away. The whole system, install a whole new system. It just depends on the soot or ash, how much it is. But homeowners, consumers have to understand, in this day and age, we have the technology. It's very, very bad for them to be inhaling this 24/7 once there's a fire. And if their walls, the skins of their walls, I mean, look at guys, drywall's real cheap. We know that. Go look at what drywall costs. The drywall costs haven't gone up that much. It's not like everything else. So, if you got to start removing drywall to see the pollution that's inside the wall, then you better be doing that.
In Redondo Beach, we had a big fire. It was a car in the back, and it was a grow house, and the wind was blowing, and the neighbor's house was affected by all that smoke. What do you think about indirect smoke or, indirect damage from smoke to a neighbor or other wildfires?
I think that's a really good point. Obviously, people are starting to claim that because you're starting to see wildfires not being covered, or there's starting to be a cap on the smoke pollution from wildfires from insurance companies. So people are starting to get educated on that. So I would say if you're next door or a few doors down from a house that catches on fire, I think, and your windows are open, I think you need to get a test. I think it's very valid to get a soot char ash test. Now, if you told me it was a half mile away, then I would say no. I'm not an unreasonable man. I mean, I would say reasonably, I'll walk into some people and I'll say no. I don't smell anything here. I don't see anything here. I took a couple wipes. I send them into the lab. There's nothing there. So sorry. But I would be careful if you were, on the same block and there was a massive fire and the wind was blowing on the same block into your house. And at the time, let's say you had some windows open, you were home, you were not home, whatever, I would definitely get a soot char ash test on my house. I'd say within the same block or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you speak about, or he brought up the instance of fires from like outside versus fires from inside, can you speak a little bit to pressurized smoke? So if you have a fire in a kitchen, that is a pressurized smoke system versus if you have a wildfire that sort of wafts into the building or into the home.
Much different. Great question. So when you have pressurized smoke, that works its way into the whole structure. We know that. We can tell unless there's certain barriers that stop them. Firewalls and things like that. But most of the time, when it's pressurized smoke, it works its way into the roof systems, into crevices and cracks, into everywhere in the house. And you have to be very careful. You have to make sure you do a really good job of absolutely looking everywhere in that house, because it creeps along, it goes to the second story, and it pretty much affects everything. When you have a wildfire, that's a lot different situation. A wildfire, a lot of times, if your windows are closed and you have closed eaves, that building most houses like that now, then the structure would only be affected on the outside of the structure, i.e. the stucco, the wood, things like that would have to be addressed. But if the windows were closed, that's one thing. But if the windows are open and it wafts by, well, a wildfire can be just as polluting as a home fire. Because a wildfire is not only burning other structures, it's burning other things. It's burning cars that have lead and plastic. It's burning other areas, and so we don't know what are in those areas. So I would say if you had a wildfire and your doors and windows were open and you were affected, I think you have to take that extremely seriously. A little different than pressurized smoke, but still, it's smoke. And guys, it's very polluted. Wildfire smoke is extremely polluted. It's burning, like I say, cars, other structures. Look what happened in Lahaina. I mean, horrible.
How
horrible.
far from the wildfire? How far can people determine with this? Should get a test?
I would think this. I would think if they walk into their home and there's been a wildfire and it smells like smoke, and you know what I'm saying? Your senses smell it. Let's say you guys weren't in the fire, but you guys walk in and you smell it and it smells like smoke. Then I think they need a soot char ash test, and I think they should be looking at filing a claim with their insurance company that if we find the soot char ash to be above 10%, then I think they really need to make an effort to file a claim and take care of themselves. Because we're sitting here right now. I'm only beholden to the homeowner and the client. I don't want anything to happen to them. Being what I am, and that's an environmental consulting company, I'm there to take care of the client. That's the only one I'm there to take care of. I want their health. I want their children to be all cancer-free. I don't want them to be affected by the fire. The only way I can do that is make sure every single thing in that home is addressed. Every single thing. Because if it's not, then we're not doing our job. Because my job is to be their doctor at that time. As a third-party testing company, I need to make sure I'm, darn serious about what I'm doing, and I need to make sure people like you guys make sure the job is done 100%. Can't drop the ball and say, "Oh well, this whole house fire, wow, it's only $52,000." Oh, come on, you can't attach money to somebody's health. Whatever it is, the insurance company, they're covered to whatever they're covered to, and everything has to be addressed, guys. Everything. Because it's their health. That's what it really comes down to, is the whole family's health. If everything is not addressed, then we're not doing our job. We're not doing it.
And people don't have advocates in that situation.
They have no advocates. They have none. I see it all the time. They have no advocates. It's horrible what I see out there in the field. But, I can only do what I can do. Sometimes I have to give them advocates.
Yeah.
It's that bad. I mean, I see total abuse. Total abuse. So the fact of the matter is that if you're a homeowner or a condo or wherever you're living and there's a fire, you need to be darn serious about getting it restored to the level that it was, not just the way it looks, but the way the air is coming, and get a clearance on that job so we can clear it. Look, when you have mold, you got to get a mold clearance, right? Otherwise, you don't know if the job is done, right, guys? Yeah. Or if you do asbestos abatement, you got to get an asbestos clearance to know that there's no more asbestos in the air or on the structure so that you can continue with construction, right? Yeah. In the same way, guys, you got to get a clearance on that fire. And
so that's
make sure.
Good thing to point out, though, that just like mold or asbestos or lead, you can't necessarily always see soot, char, and ash. And that for me to come in and just arbitrarily or ambiguously say, let's remove this wall and this wall and this wall because I see the smoke or whatever.
Right.
But it's the reality is that you can't always see it. And how are you to also know what's behind there? And I think that's a big takeaway is that you need the soot, char, and ash testing and analysis will actually say, oh, yes, scientifically there's this much smoke, soot, char, and ash, whatever the case is, or there isn't any, and then yes, we can deem that wall as safe or whatever it is. So I think that's what we always advocate against, is we always tell our clients, hey, look, if you're going to move forward with us or not, go get a test regardless. Have a soot, char, and ash analysis done regardless, because if anything gives you peace of mind to know that, hey, yes, my personal belongings were impacted or they weren't.
Well, yeah, and I feel like telling some people that walk in that don't have the trend, like, what are you, Superman? You can see behind the drywall? I mean, sometimes you got to do exploratory. We use the soot, char, ash pollution to know what areas to start tearing into the drywall. Again, tearing into drywall is not a big issue. Drywall is inexpensive.
So many times we run into the insurance adjusters and they will just point at walls and say, let's remove that wall, but not that wall, and this wall and not that wall.
That's arbitrary.
There's no way that they know.
No, there's no way that they know. It's arbitrary. Trying to cut costs at the what? At the health of the individuals that live in there? A recent
client, we brought you in on to do some testing on it. That was exactly what happened. The insurance company came out and they just did some arbitrary demolition. So they demoed out, a couple of the walls, and then we had you guys come out and you pulled up 30, 40, 50% in the vast majority of the rest of the home. And when we asked them, we said, well, what kind of investigation did you guys do? Oh, well, I did a visual investigation of the smoke that had traveled throughout the property. And we said, well, how were you supposed to know if there was any smoke on this side of the house? Well, the fire was over here, so it couldn't have gone over there.
Right. We see that all the time. It just depends on that adjuster and the insurance company. Some insurance company adjusters are great and they cooperate fully. Others just decide arbitrarily on what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I don't think your health should be arbitrary. I don't think it should be an arbitrary decision. I think everything should be addressed properly.
Yeah, and before I was in this industry, I didn't realize how important testing is. Why do you think so few people know about it? We all care about organic foods and all being healthy, and then when it comes down to a fire, everyone's like, "That's fine. That stuff you see on the wall is great." And I was stunned to hear adjusters just blow things off. They're not wearing PPE. Nope. They're not, and I'm like, am I missing something here? We're in a world where this guy's going to go and get an organic coffee, and you just walked into a...
That's a great question. I see that all the time, that the testing barely ever takes place. Mm-hmm. Unless an advocate gets involved, there's never soot, char, ash tested. Mm-hmm. Unless there's an advocate or a really great restoration company that knows what they're doing, those guys will call me and they'll say, hey, you know what, Bruce, I need you to come in here and test. I need to make sure this is taken care of properly.
Well, those guys will call me. I worked for a few insurance companies handling insurance claims, and not once did we proactively do soot, char, and ash testing. Right. It was always as a result of clients complaining or there being some sort of dispute or contention on an item. And then now, when I'm on this side, only property claims consultant, we do soot, char, and ash testing on every single fire that we get, regardless. Because then it also puts us in a better position to say, hey, look, Mr. or Mrs. Client, like, this is not just our opinion. This is scientific data saying that there is impact to this areas. This is why we're fighting for you against the insurance company for X, Y, and Z. And it also allows us to make that argument against the insurance company and say, hey, ABC Insurance Company, This is why. This isn't just my opinion. This is scientific data saying that there is 50% soot, char, and ash in this room. Like, we can't just wipe it down and move on. This is your client and our client, our mutual client that we're trying to take care of.
And I like to say what you just said. I like to say it's empirical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about. Empirical scientific evidence can't be argued. It's
Yeah.
empirical evidence. It's just the way it is. And so if we find empirical evidence, and a lot of times we find 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80%, and it's never been addressed. We'll
Yeah.
walk in there afterwards and they never addressed it. Nobody ever thought to address it. And like you say, they go out and they get the organic coffee and organic food. Oh, it's got to be organic. Oh, it's got to be, I'm a vegan, and all
Yeah.
that. But then they're living in a house that was never addressed. I'm thinking, what are you doing? But guys, I see it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's really scary. And like you say, you worked for a major insurance company. You never did soot, char, ash. You never did it.
Never.
No, not unless somebody called for it. And then they held your feet to the fire and they're like, I need soot, char, ash. And you'd probably say, well,
And then every time you get soot, char, and ash, it would say the scope of work would drastically increase.
Right.
Items, personal property items, were now all of a sudden impacted that we didn't know about. So one more thing, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. You had said you owned a dry cleaner. So what is your position on if you were to pull sampling and you had, let's say, 15% soot, char, and ash on personal items? Can you clean them?
I really don't think once they get heavily laden, I don't think it's probably a good idea to clean them, especially like baby clothes and things like that. I think you saw the white paper that Sean Scott wrote. Did you see that white paper? So
That was the new rollout for the ISCRC smoke handling guidelines.
right,
Yeah.
right. So he wrote a white paper. What he did was he took some babies' clothes that were in a fire, and the clothes were taken from the second story, but this was from the first story of the fire. So he took them to a company, and they cleaned them, and they said, hey, they're like brand new, they smell fresh. And then he sent them to a lab in Michigan where the lady is a PhD and a medical doctor that owns the lab. And they tested for it, and let me tell you, there was nickel, and there was arsenic, and there was just down the line of every single thing. And this is after they laundered the baby's clothes.
Yeah.
And look at how fresh they smell. And look at how good they look. I got out the soot and the char and the ash. The problem is those chemicals stay in the clothes. And so now you got a little baby breathing, and the clothes are right up against them. And so I tell you, I would be extremely careful. I would rather have those clothes thrown away than really addressed. Because if it's a bad fire, look, if it's just, let's say, a fire that barely affects their home, and it's a wildfire, it comes through the window, but it's barely affecting you guys. Walk in there, don't smell much. Yeah, take it to the dry cleaners, take it to the laundry, have it, redone, let them ozone it. But ozone itself is not a good thing. I don't know if you've been reading lately, but a lot of restoration companies don't even use ozone anymore. It's ozone adds a third molecule to oxygen, so it's a irritant. It's not a healthy thing. You should never be in the house while somebody's using ozone. They now use hydroxyl, which is much safer, but not totally safe because hydroxyl has some ozone in it. But it's an oxygenator. It's like a bleach. That's what ozone does. And so it's not healthy for you, and you should never be in a home where they're using ozone. But that ozone does remain on garments for a while. So I'm not really big on it unless it's a light fire. It's not a problem. Your clothes were in the drawers. Your underwear was in a drawer. Okay, maybe it's not as affected. But, to be healthy, if you have a house that really burns badly, total loss.
Total loss at all.
Total loss. And that goes for everything except for solid surface items. Like, let's say, a chair that's not upholstered, or a table that is just all wood. Okay, you can wipe it down and get away with it probably, but I wouldn't, any soft goods at all. You got to be real careful, especially like mattresses that you're sleeping on. Those are the type things that down the line, people always tell me, I always read 50% of the people in the population of the United States either get cancer, are cured from cancer, or die from cancer. 50%. That is earth-shattering when you think about it, guys. How do they get the cancer? Well, you know how they get the cancer. Things that we don't know about now that we're just learning about, like dioxins and arsenic in pressure-treated lumber, that we never thought about in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We never thought about were bad for us. But now we know they're bad for us. So products we're using now, household products, things that we're doing, that we're exposing ourselves to, those are the things we'll learn in the future that are actually causing cancer.
Yeah.
So cancer is caused by our exposure to the way our lifestyle is, what we live, what we eat, what we expose ourselves to on a daily basis. Gasoline, benzene, these things, all these things together add up to our lifestyle. And people are always saying to me, I don't know how I got cancer. I got lung cancer. I never smoked a cigarette. I hear it all the time in my line of work.
Yeah, and industry has
in the industry.
They have an incentive to not bring this all up because you're gonna defeat the cancer industry.
Right.
If you keep healing everyone, insurance companies don't want to bring it up. They're going to pay more. It's literally a bad cycle.
It's a really bad cycle, and it's a big money cycle too. We know that. I mean, billions, if not trillions of dollars a year are spent on it. And I know they're always looking for ways to cure it, but a lot of times, let's go before the cure of getting the cancer. Let's look at what's causing the cancer. And it's our lifestyle, it's what we're exposed to on a daily basis. You know, and people that live near freeways, you know, you can kind of look up on Caltrans' website, and they have testing of how much pollution is within 100 yards or 200 yards. I mean, you got to be cognizant of that. And I do get calls on that.
You got to be your own advocate.
Got to be your own advocate.
Have to be.
Yeah.
You know, and don't be surprised. I mean, you can get cancer from being exposed to, we know, asbestos. The one type of lung cancer is mesothelioma. And if you didn't think that's real, just watch late night TV, and you got every lawyer on earth trying to get the 50 or whatever $billion set aside to the government for exposure to asbestos.
Shipyard workers.
Exactly. Shipyard workers that are hull techs. Well, you're a hull tech in the Navy, you're exposed to all the insulation on that pipe. That insulation's 100% pure asbestos. We guys know that. So they're being exposed day in and day out. You know, as I tell people, you got somebody with COVID, you walk by them, probably not going to get COVID. But if you sit down in a bar with them a couple of feet away and have a few drinks and you're there for an hour, probably going to get exposed enough to get COVID. Same thing with all the other stuff in our life, especially asbestos and lead and everything.
You're sitting
else.
in there working in it. So.
Or you're drinking the lead in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you're exposed, and that directly relates to young people and as they grow up, their IQ and brain development. So we got to watch what we're exposed to. And things we're exposed to years ago, we're finding out now, like plastics turning to dioxins in the air in a house fire, we're learning are affecting us.
So the new homes are requiring there's a certain kind of fan that goes off every day, and they say the reason why we have this fan is so the chemicals that we used for all the materials it kind of keeps going out. And before I got into this industry, I would never thought anything. I thought that was a good thing. Now I'm realizing with all that can happen in a fire, that's probably bad what's in that house.
It's bad, and we do testing. That's a good point, because we do testing for VOCs, which is volatile organic compounds. And those are glues and everything else they use to make the cabinets, to put in the flooring, to glue down the carpeting. All those things add up to VOCs.
So our home that we live in is a newer build.
Right.
And I remember actually changing the HVAC filter about 3 months into it, and it was gross. And I was like, why is it so dark? And then I changed it again 3 months later. And gradually, as we were there for about a year and a half, the filter now was normal. And now I change it every 6 months or whatever the case is. And yeah, you're right. It was from the new build, like all the glues and
all the
oils
VOCs.
And paints and everything.
And oils and paints. They have it a lot too. And so I call that off-gassing. That's what we call it in the industry.
That's what it is.
So what happens is it off-gasses over like 6 months to a year. You guys remember the lumber liquidators scare that we had, CBS did? That's the one where the flooring was off-gassing.
Formaldehyde in the...
Formaldehyde.
Yeah.
That's because of the glue. So what is happening is they said, it's fine, it's not off-gassing, but actually it was made in China, and they used a stamp for California Air Resources Board, a fake stamp, and they said, oh no, it's carbureted. And then CBS found out, no, it's off-gassing, because we did hundreds of tests, and we found out it was off-gassing. But now they've cured that. They're not buying it in China, or they're really regulating the glue that they use, or the paint, or the varnishes, or the finishing, or whatever. But the things that you smell in a house, like somebody will tell me, oh, I just got the carpeting done, and I just got the flooring done, and I just got some cabinets, and I'm pregnant. And I tell them, get out of the house. Yeah. Because you're being exposed to all that formaldehyde. It's
how about
off-gassing.
AstroTurf? As this AstroTurf is leaching, right?
Well, you know, AstroTurf is really bad because it used to, I'm not sure anymore, you need to check before you buy it, but AstroTurf has a ton of lead in it.
Oh, yeah.
A ton of lead. Now, I don't know if it still does. I don't know how much they're regulating it. I think before you buy AstroTurf and that fake turf for your house and expose everybody, children
well, it's ground up tires, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking it is. Yeah. That's what I heard it was. But ground up tires, there's a lot of lead in that, and you don't want to expose small children that are playing on that turf, that fake turf, to lead. So I think it's very important to ask the question to the supplier, how much lead, and have you tested this turf, the turf that I'm using, and how much lead is impregnated in that turf? Because again, that goes all into exposure.
Yeah.
That goes into all to our lifestyles and how much we're exposing ourselves.
Yeah. I appreciate it, Bruce, for bringing in all the knowledge, and thanks again for joining us.
It's what I do. I never live it down. I hear it day in and day out. But I hate to hear people call and they're sick. You know, they're really sick, and they're like, what do I do? And by that time, guys, sometimes it's too late. Yeah. Sad. So I'm always here.
You gave us a peek into a world that not many people know.
No,
so we
they don't get it, and they don't know it, and it's kind of like you guys said, it's invisible. It's behind the wall. It's not here. It's people don't think about it day in and day out. It has to be my job to think about it for people.
People don't realize there was smoking in airplanes.
Oh yeah, I'm old enough to remember that. I remember going on airplanes. It was 30 years ago, and people were smoking like crazy, and I was coughing.
Yeah.
They're like, oh no, it's okay. Everybody that wants to smoke, just go to the back of the plane.
Was that really what it was?
Oh yeah,
They had
before my time.
Ashtrays in the middle
in the
part
arm.
Oh yeah, you're right. If you get into some of the older airplanes, you know, cough, cough, Southwest, you'll see that some of them do have
Southwest,
the
yeah. So what PSA used to do is say, if you want to smoke, go to the back. And so people in the front got just as much smoke. Yeah. It's not like the unbelievable HEPA filters will filter everything out that we were led to believe. No, the smoke just circulated throughout the cabin, and you got secondhand smoke, which causes lung cancer. We know that now, but back then, nobody knew. So that's a greatest example of how all of us were exposed.
And I feel like you're giving us that peek into what we've been exposed to now. It's kind of like we don't really know it, but our knowledge is now getting greater, and you're testing, and there's these off-gassing, which are new homes. We never heard of that. Hopefully
nobody ever thought about that. Years ago, you went, God, this car smells great. You know, God, it's got the new car smell. Well, you know, there's plastic all over your new cars. I mean, that's the off-gassing of the formaldehydes and stuff. Probably not the best thing for you. Maybe you want to keep that window open for the first couple months.
First few weeks,
for a first few weeks or whatever, because that's off-gassing, guys. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome,
Thanks, Bruce.
guys. Take care.